Remember capitalism? Last time on Yu-Gi-Oh! We discussed how power is not the only valuable resource in the game. Today, we discuss the resource known as aesthetic, or intentionality. I will build for you a Gravekeeper deck. So let me repeat for your own edification. I am a nerd. A Luddite nerd. A card game Luddite nerd. This isn't Yu-Gi-Oh! We're imagining Yu-Gi-Oh-topia. So,
it's time to duel!
Play along. Now let's assume all the world's a stage for gameplay. Each person is themselves a gamer. I am a semi-pro gamer, so watch me stunt. In an MFA program at Columbia, the only two-time poet laureate, Pinsky of the School of the Mundane, bragged he could write a poem about anything. What followed was the birth of a Bubba Misa. Pinsky deciding that content is as valuable as form. When I heard this anecdote at the New York State Writers' hoo-ha at Skidmore, in the Raymond Chandler town best known as Saratoga Springs, I heard it with the following punchline, and then he proceeded to write a poem about a coffee cup. But you can imagine other punchlines. Pinsky was so committed to living aesthetically that when he took the mic, he lectured us about words beginning with W, R, wrench, rot, wrong. He claimed they connoted torsion, high school physics metaphors. I was there to study fiction with Bharati Mukherjee and Clark Blaze, neither of whom would recommend me for an MFA several years later, but I learned the most regarding writing from that Pinsky performance and several conversations with mysterious KK, also a guy named Drew. There were a bunch of writers my age. Those two were older, who I adored, and a guy I scammed out of a ride to the airport at the end, surname Merkin. I would gladly pay him back now if he contacts me. But if you try to live aesthetically, if you apply these rigorous attention to variables to your own life, these reduced, rigorous variables, I built a Gravekeeper deck by alphabetically sorting our cards. I built this deck for you. I want you to watch me play it. Some word association to hijack your brainwaves. Think about the words Gravekeeper. Try to play them over and over in your head. Imagine Pinsky while saying W, R, rot, wrench, wrong. He's turning his wrist, hot water, cold. That twist, that's torsion. He's trying to connote torsion into a whole range and suite of emotion. I have put the word Gravekeeper into this deck as many times as I can. There are 40 cards in a Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck. Watch it as it fills up, covering up the sort of tealness, those rows of teal you see. Nothing is going to go down in the final row of teal, which says side. That's a level of complexity beyond where we're at the moment. Our most powerful card, our most powerful monster, the most powerful thing our deck can achieve, that's just a little bit extra. If you read a lot, think about it like it's punctuation. If you don't read a lot, please keep watching the video. We don't have enough Gravekeeper cards for me to do this as fluently as I'd like. We'd have to spend more in-game currency, which we're currently too low on to obtain more in-game cards, even though I could purchase these physical cards IRL, IVG, it would be impossible for me to transfer them over. So instead I hypothesize like butterflies. I scroll through lists of banned cards and spell cards, trap cards and crap cards as I try to figure out what sort of chaff will I fill this out with. Figure it out, chaff is its own flavor. There's a reason why lard conjures a taste to your mouth. You ever read any Dave Eggers? I've never really read any Dave Eggers. There was a copy of Zaytoon in my childhood home. I hope I pronounced that correctly. I went for it in italics, but never heard it said out loud, and I never opened up Zaytoon. I did like the blurb on the back of it, and I thought it had a very pleasant cover. I think Eggers is probably somebody who's codified aesthetics in a pretty meaningful way, like through that charity that I heard and almost signed up for in Chicago, but then got some bad reviews in terms of a sort of work-life balance from a really well-respected friend of mine named Brenna. So we get outplayed here by Weevil. Something to know about Weevil is he would never pick rock. That was a bad play on my part. It's worth knowing, though, that Weevil is supposed to be kind of a low-tier, very talented person. He doesn't have the resources of a Seto Kaiba, but he has actually more of a tournament pedigree that you could understand. He gets better over time. He usually beats inferior players. For some reason, he's the kind of classic character in this show that first will lose to Yugi and then later will lose to Joey. And the second loss will be more meaningful for Joey than the first loss was to Yugi. But of course, right now we're cosplaying as Yami Yugi, or the Pharaoh. Our opening hand was great. It had 2 copies of Mystic Tomato, not a Gravekeeper, and this Shard of Greed card, which resembles Pot of Greed, which you ought to know what Pot of Greed does. We also have a Call of the Haunted that I don't play out because I don't want to get destroyed. Weevil makes a bad bug doofus, a dingus really, and then plays a spell card that makes all bugs better, upgrading his dingus. Now here, I'm actually reading the cards. You can believe me or not, but that's what I'm doing. I'm looking at our cards and I realize Gravekeeper's cannon here, this guy kind of rips. And even upgraded, that bug only has 1400 power, which is the size of a Mystic Tomato. So you ever seen a killer tomato from outer space? Oh, Gravekeeper's curse. Okay, well that's how this game is gonna go, but meanwhile, I'm gonna throw a tomato at him. Call the Haunted, its time is now. Because we have a monster we care about, we want to have backup for that monster. Next turn, Shard of Greed will turn into Pot of Greed, which you ought to know what that does. And now watch the tomato beat down a bug. The way the game's text, that is to say, the mechanics and results of those mechanics, the literal game objects by the rules interact with each other, is game text. Flavor is the narrativization of that game text. So, the flavor of Weevil Underwood is bugs. Our flavor is Gravekeepers, which we express through having a bunch of cards that say Gravekeepers. Weevil's deck is bugs and cards that buff bugs, and you can imagine, in that instance, a card that buffs a bug might be good for a tomato. So now listen, let me talk to you about my good friend Gravekeeper's curse and a heuristic of aesthetic power. Gravekeeper's Heretic has 1800 attack points. Consider the attack points of these 2 monsters. They're both the same. Gravekeeper's Ambush has 1700 attack points. Something about Necrovalley. That's shown up a lot on these cards. I don't really... Yeah, Necrovalley again. Necrovalley? No, I don't know what that dude does. Okay, Gravekeeper's Curse. Gravekeeper's Curse has 800 attack, 800 defense. When it's summoned, which means when it enters the battlefield from anywhere, it inflicts 500 damage to the opponent. It has to show up face up, but that's fine. Here comes Maneater Bug, one of the better bugs. It eats something, true to life, good flavor, eats a tomato. Now we have a guy with a rocket launcher on his shoulder. He's going to shoot it for 1400. Now the Curse comes across for 800. It's done 500 and 800. Now we go to our second main phase and we use a little human fodder. Now watch. $800 plus 500 plus 700, what is that, 2,000? Gravekeeper's Curse did 2,000 damage. It just did that by showing up and doing its job. And that's pretty cool. Terraforming, that could get Necrovalley. We could look for a Necrovalley. We don't have a Necrovalley. I would have put it in the deck. Here's another bug. This is a dingus. Now it's doofus sized. 1,400 attack points. That's smaller than the tomato would have been. What is that? That's not a Gravekeeper. I think that's just a generic power. Yeah, that's not a Gravekeeper. Whatever. Let's play the 1,800 point guy. No. Nah, yeah, what is it? No, 1,800 point guy. Let's play the 1,800 point guy. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Summon. Thank you. And then we're going to call the Haunted, and we're going to bring back the Curse one more time. That's what Curses do. They kind of lurk around. And here's the thing. I mean, we have another 2,040. Well, we have 1,000,000 points of damage. The cannon guy can shoot any other Gravekeeper monster, it says, at the opponent for 700 points, which is better than Cannon Soldier, Flavor Flea, a robot that is designed to launch fodder. But notably, the cannon guy can't shoot himself. So Even though we didn't play our biggest boom boom, whatever the 8-star monster is called, even though we have a bunch of chuckle dinks coming across here, I mean, look at this. Like, we didn't even have to use our backup damage. We win, Weevil's done. In the anime, immediately before this fight, Weevil throws Yugi's Exodia cards into the ocean. Yugi induces Weevil to wager twice as much in value for the right to say he beat Yugi. Weevil is a gamer, but a poor gamer. He's derived an aesthetic. There he was talking about a moth, but I didn't see any moths. There are better gamers, and there are worse gamers. So let's talk about Necrovalley. I don't know what Necrovalley does. If I remember correctly, it pumps up some guys. It pumps up Gravekeepers. I'm using guy here as a term to refer to cards, not as a gendered term. I understand there is a gendered context. I'll try to work on my language there. We have a field spell in our deck that gives every dark type monster or dark attribute monster 500 attack and 400 defense, or maybe negative 400 defense. That would make more sense. It's very good. I put 2 copies in. It's in the top row of the blue spell cards, or third down from the top, if that makes sense. So we didn't really need it. Weevil's deck stunk. Our deck had a much stronger aesthetic. But if you go down the line and look at all the Gravekeeper cards, so many of them say Necrovalley. This was our most powerful card. I put 2 copies of Polymerization, the spell immediately above it, in the deck, just in case, you know? I mean, if we get this out, it seemed like it would have done a big wham bam, but, you know, we didn't have any Necrovalley for it to go crazy with. And that's kind of the thing, is that synergy, the appreciation of aesthetic, the attempt to induce and support aesthetic will pay its own dividends. That is to say, to create art is itself the art. The viewing of art is a separate form. A product is a result of a process. Give me a Necrovalley. Come on, what is that? One-time Necrovalley. Okay, there's another Cure, so that's pretty good. Is that a Necro? No, it's a spell card. Necrovalley. We have 1 shot left. So like I said, there are better duelists. Remember Pinsky? I do. A bullshit bromide from undergrad, creative writing. Everything is aesthetic, and yet isn't a bromide the unexceptional by rule? You've got to try, he said. The day after I post this video on the internet, I will enter a hospital's outpatient procedural wing through a separate entrance in the emergency room. I'm going to get a colonoscopy and an endoscopy, which is commonly known as the gastroenterologist's tag team. After the procedure is over, the doctor, who's never goofed up a procedure, she's going to high-five the anesthesiologist. I'm confident it will go well. Nothing too aberrant can be found from a procedure like this in general. But there's important context. The COVID-19 pandemic, this is yet another email from Panera in your inbox, is currently affecting every person on Earth. I have what a doctor might call CBBD, which is short for chronic bad butt disease. I had colitis, and am old pals with diarrhea. Certainly things could have gone better, but from context we can appreciate how much worse they could be. I told a version of this to my sister, and she laughed. I knew then it was a stand-up bit. And what is a stand-up bit but something that happened?